All right, welcome back to another live. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the biggest challenges that I see for small business owners, especially, but really leaders in general can fall into the trap of trying to do too much on their own, kind of having this mindset where you think you have to do it all or control everything. And you can work that way for a while. And if you overwork yourself and you kind of get into that workaholic zone, you might be able to do that even for a long time. But at a certain point, holding on to everything is really going to stagnate your growth. It's going to keep your company from moving forward. And ultimately, it's going to limit the opportunities that you have as an individual as well. So today I have Jonathan Barnes, founder of Work Heartily. He runs a company that's really focused on giving access to expertise when you need it through a variety of different services so that business owners can have access to the talent and expertise that they need at the right time to grow their business. And he's really focused on helping leaders understand how to let go and trust other people, which tends to not be easy for leaders. So Jonathan, thanks so much for joining me for the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great.
Yeah, so the first thing I wanted to talk about is just why do you feel it's so hard for leaders to let go? Why do you think that's such a big issue?
I think it's a great topic because leaders they're leading a team or they're leading a company for a reason, because they've really had the idea or they have the opportunity to move it forward. And it's hard when you're starting a company. You kind of have to do everything yourself, honestly. And I've done this personally, and I've seen this with some of our clients. It's pretty amazing to be able to jump into a venture and get everything done yourself. So sales, prospecting, the business plan, of course, accounting, invoicing, hiring your first team members, dealing with HR issues. It's all those kind of stuff, all those kind of things that you're doing. And so when you get to a certain size, like you said earlier, you can continue to do it, but you will likely be the lid of your business, because you can't stretch yourself out any thinner, and you can't focus in on anything more, because you got everything that you're responsible for. So I think leaders find it hard to let go, because probably they feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility. They are determined to make everything work, and some of them haven't really experienced what possibilities there are out there.
So what are some practical ways for leaders to start working through that process and being more open
Yeah,
to letting go? And specifically, there's some people that kind of lean that way more naturally, but for the people who are more
yeah,
like type A driven,
yeah,
control freak type personality, what do you do to start working on that?
yeah. Well, I'll say this, I guess 2010, so 14 years ago, I hired an executive coach because I was kind of dealing with this in a big corporate world. I've been with a company that had grown exponentially and was going through some turmoil, organizational turmoil, and I needed somebody to help me navigate. And I realized that I had some friends and mentors and advisors, and they were like, I can kind of help you with some things, some aspects. You probably just need a coach to help you think through this. So I hired an executive coach and did this. One of the first things he did for me, his name was Bill. He actually gave me an assessment, and not like a personality assessment or anything, but it was really a how do I work and what role do I play within a team. That was super helpful for me. I realized that I was kind of bucking up against the system that
Hmm.
um, I wasn't necessarily made for. Well, I was more of a founder, and I was dealing within a huge, pretty difficult bureaucratic kind of system. Policy changes every 30 seconds, it felt like, and I didn't understand why, and so it was really frustrating to me. So anyway, I think that was helpful. So I've actually incorporated that in some of our initial discoveries, whether we're working with a company to help them think through leadership changes, or operational efficiencies, or we're also thinking about executive coaching and just helping somebody understand this. It doesn't really matter. But we really do try to help with assessments, organizational health structure assessments, as well as personality or individual positions, not necessarily their personalities, but how they work. And I've used things like assessments like the Colby Index, the Working Genius. I think those are really good with just specifically how you work and how you fit within a team. There are some other ones that were great that are great out there, but those are the two that I've seen have been the most impactful over the past few years for me.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's really important to start digging into the individual, how they work, how they operate, and
Yeah,
understanding.
yeah. I think there's it's yeah, especially for people that are type A, or maybe like you just described, like really driven. They want to make decisions, and they want to know the reason why. And I think that is helpful to say, hey, this is an objective. This is the reason why you're frustrated here. This is the reason why you're thriving here. Let's think about how we can supplement the places where you get frustrated, and really pour the gasoline on the things that you are really good at, and really drive focus. One of my colleagues recently just said, the less you focus on, the more you achieve. And I think we heard that from
Mm.
Michael Hyatt, but that's really something that that I've seen in my own experience running businesses, but also helping customers and clients have that drive that efficiency within their own teams.
Yeah, I want to come back to that point because
Okay.
I think that's really key. I mean, I've seen that a lot. But before we go there, if I don't come
Okay.
back to it, bring me back to it because I want to spend some time on that. But
Sure.
before we move on from tactics and strategies or even the mindset of letting go, just want to play out a scenario like if you're coming to me and you're going, hey, you're doing too many things, you need to let go. And then my response to that is, well, hey, I've done that before. I've tried that before. I hired a team member before. I've hired team members before. I trusted them.
Yeah.
I gave them the reins and they totally screwed it up. And so it's more work for me to hire somebody
Yeah.
in and train them to do what I'm doing than just to do the work myself.
Yeah. Man, I've seen that so many times. You're right. It is hard at the very beginning to train somebody. One of the tactics, or one of the strategies really at the very beginning, is to determine not necessarily everything that you need to give away, but maybe one thing or two things to give away that are not necessarily where you need to be spending the vast majority of your time. And one of the tools that I use that I was introduced to it, I guess in 2017 or 18, when I was running my previous company, Staffing as a Mission. I went through. I mentioned Michael Hyatt. I went through his Free to Focus workshop and went through a tool called the Freedom Compass. And basically, it was identified several ways where I was, or several things I was doing that I could do, but I wasn't the best at, and I didn't
Mm.
derive a lot of excitement about it. But I could do it. I was competent in these tasks, and I realized that I had not really utilized the talents and gifts of the team that I already had to do some of those things. I was still holding on to it, and it was really just taking an audit of all the things I was doing uh, every week, and seeing how much time I was spending doing these tasks, and what I really should have been focused on, which at the time was, client engagement, and a really bigger picture type of strategy
Mm.
work, and some business development work. And I realized that if I was spending time doing these other tasks, I was taking away time from the things I should have been doing as a leader of the company. And I find that I found that tool really, really helpful. But I think there's you're back to what you said about mindset. It really, that's what it is. It's coming from a point of, hey, I don't know everything. Hey, I know I should be doing different things than I am now because it's not working, or maybe I'm getting frustrated. And then, and sometimes it's helpful to have somebody from the outside saying, have you thought about this? Can we think about this in a different way? and really relying on somebody who's a trusted advisor who's seen it before, who can kind of guide you through that process. Um, and you'd be surprised what you can. I remember coming back from that exercise and going straight to my controller and saying, "Hey, all those emails I get from the bank, I don't need to be doing that. I'm so sorry. I've been like wasting times like getting the emails from the bank and then forwarding them to you when I should just like give them to you." you know
Yeah.
and she had it perfectly. She was excellent at it, and I don't know why I was the barrier to that.
Probably
So
like, thank you at that point. Get out of my way. So I
yeah,
can
she
get
was
my
like,
task.
finally, yeah, exactly. And those were the things that she was so good at that I
Mm.
had, really no interest in really digging deep into them. I could read the emails and then start freaking out about the cash flow issues or something like that. I shouldn't have
Yeah.
done that. Um,
Well, and
so anyway, those
this kind
are,
of brings us back
yeah,
to that topic that I was saying. Let's come back to it, which is that
okay,
idea of focus. And I think, maybe
yeah,
one response to it. You're in the Nashville area, and so
yeah. Is a prerequisite, and if you're in Nashville, to have
some guitars in the
guitars on your
background.
wall. Yeah, and
I love
they're
it.
not a virtual background. They're actually real. I'm just joking.
I
Yeah,
love it.
it's
You
something you
got
got
the
to do in Nashville.
Nashville virtual background going for you.
That's right. That's right. I paid up extra for that.
Yeah, I love it. So Dave Ramsey's out there, and something that he says all the time that I think
Yeah,
is relevant to this conversation is like, well, if you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, and obviously he's talking about finances, but I think the same thing
yeah,
applies. Like if you're a business owner, you're burnt out, you feel like nobody cares as much as you do,
mm,
and you're wearing way too
yeah,
many hats, you're probably doing more than you should. And if you're
yeah,
at that point, you just have to make a decision. Do you want to keep doing that until you totally burn out, or until something really major falls through the cracks for a client or for a team member that's super important to keep on your team that you're dropping the ball
yeah,
for? I mean, I'll give an example of
yeah,
that. My somebody I know, I won't say any more than that, not to give away information, but works for a firm where he's supposed to be getting a partner, becoming partner at this firm. And there's a bunch of partners who want him to be in that position. They've been working on it. But then there's one guy who's in charge of making that happen, who's now the partner who's in charge of operating the business, that's just not prioritizing it. And they've already lost
mm,
one other person that was supposed to become partner who left. And this guy's just dragging his feet on it. And so, it's an
yeah,
example of that guy is either just not doing his job effectively, which is true, but probably he's got too many things going on, and this isn't the top of his priority list. So it just gets being pushed down because he thinks, oh, this guy will still be there in 6 months or eight months, but who knows?
yeah. That's
Maybe
not a
he won't
guarantee.
be when you need him. So anyway, I
Yeah,
think that kind of segues us into this idea of focus, and the
yeah,
idea that if you're trying to do
yeah.
everything at the same time, you're really dropping the ball on, or at least not getting as much as you could out of those top priority things that you should be doing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I just talked to a customer last week who has just signed an agreement with us because of this exact thing. He runs EOS on this company, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with EOS, but for those
Mhm.
of you that aren't, it's a great way of actually running a company, meeting cadences, goal setting, keeping your eye on what you got to do. And specifically in this case, he had drawn out his accountability chart. And accountability chart, if you don't know about it, or your audience might not know about it, but it's a great way of looking at things versus a just a or organizational chart. Is actually what position is out there and who's responsible for what and what they're supposed to do. Well, he had all these positions written out on the accountability chart. Guess whose name was on, like, not all of them, but a lot of them. uh, Him, yeah, the CEO. And
Mhm.
he had hired some people and they were great. They're doing some great work. But in one certain area, he was really driving, being the person responsible. And during our conversation, we generally have a discovery call, and then we talk through like more of a deep dive. And during our deep dive, I brought in a colleague who's a COO expert, and he was just like, tell me about this accountability chart. We're talking through it, and what we got to the bottom of is this specific CEO. He's got this really cool idea that's a tech play in his company, his industry, and he would love to spend more time on that because he thinks it's a game changer. He's going to utilize AI
Mm,
with some really specific, great stuff that would be like I said, a game changer for the industry. But he has no time to devote to that
mm,
because he's working on all these different positions. He's doing all these different wearing all these different hats. And so one of the things, the great thing about that is he was clear on it, and I think clarity is such a gift when you're in
mm.
that space. But then sometimes you might have clarity, but you might not have a budget to do anything about it. You
Yeah.
might not have time. Um, and so one thing I was going to go back to you was something about like it might operate for a while and then something breaks. Don't forget that the thing that might be breaking is actually your own health.
Mm.
You might be totally burned out and shut down, which is not a good thing either. Uh,
Or putting
regardless
so
if your
much
business
pressure on
is
your team. Like,
exactly, yeah,
I
and
mean,
then
for
you
one,
lose
like if
somebody, and
you're
you've
a
got
decent person, you
concern.
should probably care about your team generally and their, well-being. But
Yeah,
even if you don't, it's going to cost you in the long run if you put pressure on your
that's
team.
right.
And I've been in that position multiple times at
Yeah,
different companies before, where the leadership just puts unreasonable pressure on the
mm,
team. And
yeah,
some people will just take it longer than they should. And other people are like, I'm not going to be treated this way. And they go usually find a better opportunity, making more
yeah,
money than you were being paid. And if you don't treat people well for long enough, they're going to leave. And what happens to
yeah,
you when they leave, you end up having more on your plate, more to do, and you're in a
yeah.
worse spot than you were to begin with.
Yeah, the churn is real. It really impacts everybody around it, including the leader and the culture around you. So I think there's, that example I have was somebody who's self-aware enough to understand it and some clarity around it. Now, what does he do next? He does, I think, one of the issues that you might run into is like, yeah, I know I need to outsource, but I can't hire anybody right now, or it's going
Yeah.
to take me too long to find somebody, or I've got so many other things on my plate that I can't necessarily think about it, and have some sort of like next step to do
Yeah.
right now. And so that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about. One of the reasons I started Work Heartily is I felt like there's another option to have access to expertise, not just like hiring somebody full time, or getting just a one time project and a consulting arrangement or something like that. It's really having an ongoing advisor or ongoing, hands-on executive uh, engagement. The buzzword is fractional engagement, but that's sometimes misleading because it kind of leads with like, hey, you're just going to get the bare minimum of somebody. My goal is or our goal has been to really come alongside and work with the leader and say, what do you really need?
Yeah.
And by the way, I think, yeah, what do you want to do? Great. That sounds great. I think you should do that based on our experience, what we've seen in other areas. And by the way, I'm going to help you do it.
Yeah.
We're,
I love it.
the executive is going to help you do it. Um,
Wait, before you go
and
any
so I
further
think
there, because
there's,
I want
yeah,
to,
sure.
because I want to spend some time on this section that you're talking about.
Okay.
But there's one thing I want to get to first, because otherwise we'll buzz by it, which is you talked about how somebody can get burnt out, and you gave an example of somebody who's starting to recognize, this customer who's starting to recognize, hey, my time is worth more, or it's more important for me to spend time on XYZ issue.
Yeah.
So you've got this issue where
Yeah.
you're struggling to let go. Now you're recognizing, okay, I need to focus on the right things for me to do and start, if you're focusing on those things, it kind of gives a reason, a why for letting go of the other things. Okay, this is your priority, whether it's
Mhm.
business development or, thought leadership, so you can, move your business forward and have more
Right.
leadership opportunities, whatever that is that they need to be focusing on. Maybe it's writing a book, whatever that thing is. How
Sure.
do you
Yeah.
figure out your zone of excellence? How do you hone in on what that thing is when you're strapped for time? You don't have the time to sit and think about something like that. Like, how do you figure out what that is so that you can have the drive to actually put those other things off and focus on your zone of excellence?
Yeah, I mentioned some of those assessments earlier, like the Colby score, the Working Genius. Those are good, like starting points, but really where you've got to spend some time. I know it sounds, you might not have time, but you really need to prioritize, and it really could take 45 minutes. But thinking through where, what are the top 3 things I need to be doing every day, and spending 85 to 90% of my time during the week
Hmm.
doing these 3 things. And it doesn't really need to be more than 3, maybe 5, but really the kind of the categories could be very, very little, a small number. And I like it. I like to think about it in terms of what gets me going, like what gets me up in the, wakes me up and gets me excited to get out of bed. What do I
Yeah.
love to do? One of my things I love to do is connect with people and make connections for others, help others. I call it shining on stage. I love to see people shine in what they're how they're made and what they're called to do and what they're good at. And then also what you so those are the components. Like, what are you really excited about? What gets you excited every day
Yeah.
to do within your business? And then what are you really good about? Like, what do people pay you to do? Um, because you're the best at it, or that it comes naturally to you, or
Yeah.
you love it. All those kind of melding in those zones, where that intersection is, the Venn diagram, or so to speak, that's where you should be spending most of your time. So if you can distill it down, I would take a list of the things like I mentioned in that Freedom Compass uh, tool that I used a few years ago. I just wrote down all the
Yeah.
stuff I was doing and put them in categories like I like doing that, I don't like doing that. I'm really good at that. I'm terrible at this. And then where those things are meeting, those 2 things are like you're passionate about it, you're really good at it. When those things are together, you should take note, because that's what people pay you to do, because you're good at it and you love to do it. It gives you energy throughout the day. So I think that's what I would. It might take 30 to 45, maybe an hour, depends on how much stuff you're doing every week, but I would spend time doing that, and couple that with some assessments. Talk to somebody who knows what they're, an advisor who can talk you through that, and then give you some very practical ways of applying that in your day to day. Like, how do I get there? How do I focus only on
Yeah.
this? I think I mentioned 85-90% of your time should be spent on those like top 3 things you're doing.
Yeah.
Um, well, how do I get
Yeah. I
there?
mean,
Talk to
I think
somebody about that.
another piece of that I think a lot of business owners don't take into account is if you own the business, you get to
Mm,
decide what your business looks like. And I feel like a lot of people
that's
end
right.
up in a situation by default where maybe they're serving too many customers and they have
Yeah.
too many employees for the kind of business that they would actually enjoy doing. So if you find yourself doing tons of things that you hate doing every single day, you might need to reevaluate and go, well, what would it take for me to spend time doing the things I actually like doing? And so, I mean,
Yeah.
I know it depends on the situation, but I think a lot of times if you trim what you're doing for clients and you focus on the things where you're going to bring the greatest impact, and then you spend your time doing what is in your zone of excellence, you're going to be able to charge more, working with better quality people, like better quality clients, and ultimately spend a lot less time in meetings and a lot less time on all this other stuff. And at the end of the day, your revenue might go down, but your profit goes up when you focus on the right things that you actually enjoy doing. And then you like your business, you like doing what you're doing. You don't
Yeah.
end every
Yeah.
day totally burnt out.
Yeah. I think it's back to being self-aware and understanding what really makes you tick, what makes you excited about, your values, what you love about, your day to day, whether you prefer autonomy or community or whatever you want. If your business is not serving you and resonating with those core values, then it's time to get back to your core values and say, this is
Yeah,
what I need to. These are the changes I need to make. And you're right, you
I
might
love
lose
that.
revenue, but there might be some opportunity to, increase profitability. And what is really success? How do you define success? Is it just making more money? Probably. I mean, some people might say that. I would not say that. I would say that, your needs are met, and you are doing what you were made to do. I think that's more successful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and so often I actually had a post about this week, but I've been around a lot of small business owners for my whole life, and there's certain people who get these priorities right, and their family is in order, and their home life is in a good situation, and their business is making that better, and they're able to bring their kids in, and their kids are able to learn the business, and whether they're going to work in that business long term or not, it provides an amazing education for their kids. It's an amazing platform for their family and for their life outside of work. And then you see other people who run a business their entire life, and it completely sucks them out of their family, out of their community, and they make a lot of revenue, and they might even have a lot of profit, maybe, but at the end of the day, they're losing out on things that, in my opinion, I mean, definitely for me, are way more important. And I think it's important we're having this conversation about letting go. The only way you can do that is if you get your priorities in line. And we're told by our culture so much that we need to be focusing on making more money and hustling and having the next big thing and having a very public facing business where you're going to sell. But look at all these guys who have been super successful, like Tom Brady, he's the GOAT, right? Mm-hmm. And his family totally falls apart so he can play, and there's more going on there, but sure. He's focusing so much on being the GOAT, and was it worth it? When he's sitting around and he's old, and he's losing all that. And then Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Steve Jobs, these are all the guys that when we talk about being a leader and growing as a company,
or
they're
Elon
the ones
Musk
that are glorified. Yeah, Elon Musk. And all of those guys have made sacrifices to be the greatest that to me are not success. Like they're successful in one realm while losing in another. And so if you own a business, you get to choose what success is. Yeah. And you don't necessarily get to do that now, but you can start designing your business now and making these decisions to get there over the next couple of years.
Well, that's one of the reasons, I look back at my own career, and obviously I'm not to the level of any of those guys you mentioned from a revenue perspective. But I will say from a time perspective, I was on that trajectory, and I was part of a company that really valued under the guise of, hey, we're all family. We were sacrificing our true families and our true family time to be part of this business family and to work 80 to 100 hours a week to get this thing done. And, it's totally not worth it. I mean, I sacrificed, my kids were young. I'm very thankful that I realized this when my kids were younger. But so by the time I was 30, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. My 20s were just wasted. I feel like wasted. I mean, I had all these accolades and all this growth in the company, but in terms of wasting time at the office versus spending time and wasting in a good way, having a good time with my family, right?
Yeah.
And so that was a switch that I flipped when I turned 30. And so from then on, like when I started my previous company, it was all about how do I create a family culture that prioritizes your family over the business. Like in terms of That's order, huge. They're still important. And then when I started Work Heartily, same thing. I mean, I started Work Heartily right in the middle or at the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic times, so April of 2020. And I really value having some autonomy and independence because my family and I, we homeschool. There's a lot of different things we want to do. We camp a lot. And so Work Heartily has actually I've been able to prioritize them and experiences with my children. I've got 6 children, my wife and I do, and also grow a business. Yeah. And you don't have to you really don't have to sacrifice. But back to what you're saying, I mean, you've got to live out your core values. And if that's a value to you, then lean into it.
So to tie it back together, you don't have to sacrifice your family if you're willing to let go. If you're willing to focus on the things that you do best and let go of the control. Is everything going to be as perfect in your business if you let somebody else make some decisions? Sometimes not. Sometimes it'll be better if you're actually willing to recognize that it's better and you're willing to have the humility to recognize it's better whether you're not doing certain things. But if you don't let go, then your business will consume your entire life and there'll be nothing else. So it kind of brings us back to this final point of the conversation, which is when should you, so we say, okay, you made that mindset switch. You go, I'm going to let go. Now you've focused on finding that zone of excellence. You've gotten your why and you go, okay, this is what I'm really good at. And this is my priorities in my life that I'm going to prioritize over being a workaholic. And then now we're going to go, okay, well, how do you do that? And the only way to do that is to bring in the right resources at the right time. And that could be
That's right.
hiring. It could be, raising somebody up internally into a leadership position. It could be hiring a leader into your company. It could be outsourcing, an entire department of what you're doing, or it could be, bringing in a leader, either a fractional leader or, getting access to mentors or leaders during these different stages. So how do you help people think through that decision-making process, when they should kind of focus on which part of bringing in help as they let go?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but obviously it depends. It depends on the state of your business, where you are. But the way the way I coach everybody that asks that question is like, well, let's look at your team. Let's think about where you are. Let's look at your budget. What does your budget look like this year? And then what makes sense for you right now, and what makes sense for you in 3 years? And then can we work
Mm,
backwards from an initiative perspective? Like, hey, okay, it's year 3, we're here. Year 2, we're going to be here. Year 1, we're going to be here, and kind of help you think through what would look best based on what you know now, and then where you want to go. So beginning with the end in mind. And then, if you do want to hire somebody, great. How do you draft that great job description? How do you go through your natural networks first before you utilize somebody else?
mm,
Just all those kind of ways of growing your team. And then, like you said, there might be some amazing people on your team already that have the capability and the wherewithal and the willingness to grow. How do you coach them? How do you create some time to coach them, or
yeah.
bring in somebody to help coach them? So I'm sorry to say it depends, but that's the process you gotta go through is really where we started at the very beginning, which is being self-aware and understanding like where you are, what your
Yeah.
capabilities are now, and where you want to go.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I'm a little bit biased in this because I'm play a consulting role as well with clients,
Sure.
and I kind of end up in that zone. But I've worked now for a few companies that have done consulting and worked with consulting clients who do consulting on a massive scale. And what I've
Mm,
learned is that a lot of people make the mistake of either over hiring too soon, or trying to let somebody internally kind of create a role that they've never had before without the experience and without coaching or oversight or training to help support them. And I think both of those are extremely costly mistakes, because on the one side, you can hire an amazing leader, but if you don't really need their main area of, talking about zone of excellence, if they're only working in their zone of excellence for whatever that thing is for 3 months, and then the rest of the time that they're with your organization, they're not really in that zone of excellence because they have this one thing that you need that they're incredible at, but they're there for 3 months. Now they're doing things that are outside of that zone of excellence, and you almost have to make stuff up for them to do. Or maybe they're only spending
sure.
20% of their time for the first 2 or 3 or 4 years that they're
Right.
there, as your company matures to the point where you can get the full value from them. And then on the flip side, when you have somebody internally, no matter how smart they are, if they've never walked through the process before, they're going to make a ton of mistakes. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't give opportunity, but you should have
That's
somebody
right.
that's going to help train that person who has been there before. And I think at the end of the day, you end up spending significantly more money to hire a role internally to make certain transitions. There's certain times where it makes sense, but to make certain transitions, you end up spending a lot less to bring somebody in, pay them a little bit more in a chunk to help you get over a hump, help you train somebody, or get the right processes in place than you do to
Mhm.
hire.
Yeah, I think you have to weigh out the opportunity cost. Do you want to spend a lot of time with somebody? Do you have the time to train them up internally, or do you have a lot of um, you know cash on the sidelines waiting to hire somebody who is willing to do it, but maybe might be underutilized? My the first thing that I did when I started my previous company was I hired a fractional CFO and a fractional chief HR officer, essentially a chief people officer, because I knew that that was something that not in my zone of excellence, but also I couldn't afford hiring somebody full time.
Yeah.
So and then eventually after that time frame, we hired somebody internally to take over those roles and kind of reduce some of our the level that we were working with those individuals,
Mhm.
which was by design. So not everybody can do that, but I think there's ways of thinking through that. There are hybrid working engagements like a fractional executive or consulting role or outsourced departments like a chief marketing officer or an agency model that you can actually you get a lot more bang for your buck, but also have like I think we mentioned earlier is having great expertise on hand ready to help you grow
Yeah.
without uh, without taking too much from you as a leader. You can trust somebody who can actually get it done.
All right. I always say 20 to 30 minutes for these and then always go over because it's a great conversation. I'm enjoying it. There's one more thing I'm kind
Yeah,
of
I'm looking at the time right now.
curious about here from
Okay.
your perspective, and this could be the where we wrap it up is
Okay.
one big mistake that I see with small business owners is where they want to outsource something and they're a little too ready to outsource it without understanding it. And an area where I see that happen a lot is in marketing or sales, where like
Okay.
to me, business owner, you need to understand what it takes to win, to find new customers and win them over,
Yeah.
how to design your offer. That's a part of the business that I think is a lot of people want to outsource if they're not natural at sales. So then they'll hire somebody in or
Yes.
they'll, work with an agency or whatever. But I think that that's really setting you up for potential huge challenges. Like you get a rock star salesperson and they kill it and you got lucky, like cool. But most of the time that doesn't really happen. So yeah, just kind of curious for your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I'm kind of thinking about two examples. One is actually a call that I had today about marketing and the potential customer. I mean, they're still trying to figure out what their brand strategy is. And they're overwhelmed right now with the things that got to get done with their business that they can't spend time to do brand strategy before not outsourcing some of the day-to-day marketing. And what their strategy is and then how they're going to actually measure it. Um, that's an example of somebody who's thinking about this in a great way. Like, okay, I know I'm deficient in my strategy, or we're not formulated. It's not formulated totally yet. So can we help me think through the strategy before we start jumping into outsourcing it?
Yeah.
I have seen this. The other example is somebody who just, uh, you know, uh, outsourced to a marketing chief marketing officer fractional, and was frustrated with the output but they hadn't necessarily defined what they wanted to measure.
Yeah.
And so it was, kind of frustrating on both sides. And yeah, I think if you're too early to outsource, and you haven't defined what you want to actually the outcome you want, whether it's in sales or marketing or even just in technology, a lot of what we do is in technology, just kind of thinking through what initiatives there are and what we want to get accomplished with an IT project. Those things are, it's very frustrating. And then you spend a lot of money that you wish you hadn't because you didn't spend the time to define it. So I
Yeah.
would say it's a working alongside the person you're hiring, not just handing it off. And then I think I put this out in a video recently where, it's not like somebody just gives you the keys and say, yeah, see you later.
Yeah.
But it's somebody who gives you a copy of the keys, is in the room with you and helping you to say,
Yeah.
hey, let's organize the bookshelves this way. Let's arrange the furniture that way. And then you're able to get some guidance from the leader to accomplish the things he wants or she wants, and then the vision that they have.
Yeah. I love it. Very well said. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. This is a great conversation. Didn't want to end it because sharing some good
I know we
nuggets.
could
So
talk
thank
for a
you
long
so
time.
much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us on. We'll talk to you very soon. Thank you.
Absolutely.